My narcissistic sister tried to destroy me, but my family brushed it off as a joke. Now everyone realizes how messed up she is. A little background. I'm the second youngest of 5 siblings. My older siblings are 2 brothers and a sister, who I'll call X for this story. There's a 5-year age gap between us, so we never really had that typical sisterly bond. Growing up, I was always a burden to her, and any time I got to make a choice, like picking a movie, she would get upset. Even at 9, she had control issues. Fast forward to now, I'm 18, almost 19, and she turned 24 earlier this year. In June, her boyfriend Y proposed to her during a family beach day. It was one of those over-the-top proposals with big white letters and rose petals, and my family arrived just in time for the big reveal. She said yes, and everyone, including my parents and older siblings, was thrilled. The youngest sibling, who's only 4, didn't quite understand what was happening. Now, the drama. Since the proposal, X has turned into a total bridezilla. At my mom's request, I was made a bridesmaid, so I'm caught up in all the chaos. Here are the demands she's made so far. All bridesmaids have to pay for their own $300 blush pink dresses, along with shoes, hair, and makeup. We're required to attend all wedding and bachelorette events, including contributing $800 towards a bachelorette weekend in Toronto at the Fairmont Hotel, which costs $1,000 just for the hotel stay. We must attend all dress appointments, even if they're only for the bride, and pay for our own alterations, which adds about another $300. For cake tastings, venue visits, and catering, we all need to attend and pay $25 each for the tastings. Guests and the bridal party must pay $150 to reserve their spot at the wedding, and gifts must either be cash or from the registry. She's tracking all gifts on a spreadsheet and has said she will return anything that doesn't match her theme. My mom says it's just anxiety, but I think it's another way for my sister to control everything, especially since she wants a December wedding on a ski hill. If people are interested, I can provide updates as things unfold. Edit, I realized I didn't include the most controlling parts, so here they are. 1. All bridesmaids are required to attend hair and skin appointments every 6 weeks to ensure we look flawless in the pictures. This is at our own expense. 2. Anyone with tattoos has to cover them up. The dresses go up to the neck, ankles, and wrists, but she's the only one allowed to show her tattoos and colorful hairstyle. We either need to dye our hair a natural color or wear a wig, which we have to pay for ourselves. 3. The dresses only come in sizes 0 to 10, which works for most people, but those who don't fit are expected to lose weight. I'm a size 12, and my sister has already called me fat and sent me a keto diet book from Amazon. 4. No vendors are allowed to speak directly to the bride or groom. They have to go through us first. She created a shared Gmail account with our last name and wedding for this purpose. We're supposed to know what's acceptable and not ask her. 5. We're also responsible for telling guests they need to pay the $150 deposit to secure their spot at the wedding. If we don't get the deposit, they don't come. This whole situation is stressing my mom out. This version condenses and clarifies the original message, making it easier to follow while preserving the key details. I asked them to confirm what they planned to purchase from the registry or the amount they intended to contribute. All of this is making me realize that my family isn't typical. I'm going to reach out to my institution to explore treatment options and see if I can move into residence earlier than expected. I also want to thank the person who privately messaged me about removing my mom from my bank account and retrieving my birth certificate, etc. I plan to do this when I speak with the bank. I texted my mom while I was at work, suggesting that her dad and I talk about the situation while X is staying with her fiancé for the night. I'm hoping to show this post to my mom and dad so they can better understand where I'm coming from. Edit 3. I've decided to take a break from this because, as many of you have pointed out, this situation isn't normal. Our family dynamic isn't typical. I called my aunt, who is also my godmother, while at work. She agrees that my mom's behavior is unusual and encouraged me to discuss everything with my parents, not just the wedding, but also the favoritism and other issues that go back to my childhood. She offered to be there for me in case anything happens during my work shift. Once my shift ends, I'll quickly pack a bag for my aunt to pick up before I have a serious conversation with my parents about important topics. In the end, my mom will have to acknowledge that money plays a huge role in people's lives, and if she refuses to return, it could prevent others from participating as intended. I keep trying to make her understand this, but she refuses to listen. Her fiancé works in IT and earns over $120,000 annually, while she makes $100,000 as an accountant. They can easily afford these things. I plan to inform my mom and sister that I won't participate until all my expenses are covered. When my sister acts out, my mom shouldn't always try to maintain peace. I'm even hoping her fiancé steps back, though I doubt he will since he seems to love her fiery personality. They complement each other well. The only person who can calm her down is him. I'm curious what his family thinks about the costs. I hope it's normal for his family, though I've recently learned it's not typical for Italian families, despite what some say. This whole situation is ridiculous. I fully agree with OP. My issue is that I can't afford to take on more debt because of my college loans. I'm already worried about being in debt since the student loan interest rates are 26%. I'll let my mom know that I don't have the financial means to be my sister's bridesmaid unless my expenses are covered. Maybe she'll allow me to participate outside of the wedding party. She has 12 bridesmaids, not 13, so adding me would even things out with her fiancé's fraternity class, which consisted of 13 members. If I drop out, 2 of the groomsmen will have to walk together. What's even more frustrating is that my sister expects me to save her because I'm her sibling. My parents can't give me the $2,000 I need for the wedding because they're spending nearly $100,000 on it. Meanwhile, my tuition for university this fall is $177,000. It's such an unusual parenting decision, spending $100,000 on a wedding but leaving their child to cover their own education costs. Did my sister even go to college? Honestly, I would tell my parents that I don't want this $100,000 wedding. I wanted to ask my parents to provide financial support for my college expenses, as well as help cover some additional costs like weddings and honeymoons. A week later, I have an update on how things unfolded. First off, I apologize for the delay in sharing this. The night I planned to talk to my parents, my mom said she wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. After that, we got busy helping my sister move into her fiancé's apartment, and the conversation was put on hold for a bit. Finally, 2 days ago, we had the talk, and I needed time to process everything that was said. It turns out that my dad wasn't fully aware of the situation. He knew he'd have to cover some wedding or honeymoon expenses for my sister and her dress, but what I learned surprised me. My parents had been opening $25,000 accounts for each of my siblings and me. The rule was that once we turned 19 and started post-secondary education, the money was ours to use. However, a lot had changed since my sister got engaged. Apparently, she had expressed to my mom that she felt left out growing up, which led my mom to feel guilty. In a long conversation, my mother decided she could use some of the money from the accounts to cover my sister's wedding expenses. Both of my older brothers serve in the armed forces in Canada, where their expenses, including education, are covered. As a result, they hadn't used their $25,000 accounts. So my mom had $50,000 at her disposal and thought she could just give me $155,000 when I needed it for a wedding, car, or house in the future, since I had saved up $117,000 on my own. Unfortunately, my sister has a history of manipulating people to get what she wants, which was evident even during the wedding planning. Thanks to the advice and support from many people on Reddit, I've learned a lot about narcissism and manipulation, and I can see how my sister used these tactics, even from a young age. When I was born, my mother suffered from severe postpartum depression, PPD, and had to be in treatment for 4 months. My father, brothers, and a live-in nanny cared for me during this time, but my sister, who was only 5, didn't get much attention from my dad because he was overwhelmed. This caused her to develop resentment toward me. Over the years, she manipulated situations to get what she wanted, which continued into adulthood. After my mother's health issues, she tried to compensate by giving my sister everything she asked for, which only worsened the situation. As my sister got older, instead of asking for toys, she asked for expensive trips and experiences. Meanwhile, I became very close to my dad, who became my best friend. But the relationship between my sister and me shifted again when our mom unexpectedly became pregnant with our youngest sibling. Now, on to the second update. Once my sister moved out, I pushed my parents to finally have the long-awaited talk. This time, my mom was feeling better, so we sat down to discuss things. I explained how I felt about the unfairness of the situation and the financial burden it would place on me. To my surprise, my dad was furious. He hadn't known the full story. $100,000, the cost of the wedding, along with my sister's behavior, caused quite a bit of tension. I found it offensive that Mom kept bringing up the wedding budget, even though it hadn't been fully discussed with me or my father. I showed screenshots of the group chat, and we managed to resolve the issue of me paying the $25 wedding fee and clarified that I wasn't required to attend. My dad approved this decision. Then my parents asked me to spend some time in my room while they discussed the budget issue on their own. Later, I showed them this post, and when Dad asked why I hadn't felt comfortable talking to them sooner, he got really upset. He immediately called my sister, insisting she come over to discuss things. She was with her fiancé and his parents, so she said she'd be there in about 4 hours. When Dad pressed, she blocked his number and hung up on him. My dad told me to return to my room and leave my phone behind so they could read through the post and responses. Later, my mom came to talk to me, but I wasn't sure exactly what had happened. She explained things like PPD, postpartum depression, that I wasn't aware of before. We worked through our issues, and I asked my sister to see a therapist, as my mom believed her 4-month absence had triggered this behavior. My sister claimed she tried therapy but couldn't continue. I told her I'd be willing to go see her or even consider limited contact, LC, with my parents if she didn't go to therapy. Eventually, my sister joined the chat and assured me I'd get my money back and wouldn't have to attend the wedding if I didn't want to. She mentioned her fiancé's family wasn't contributing much to the wedding costs, which her sister was charging $150 per guest for, even though they had told their mom it was an Italian custom. When my sister finally returned about 5 hours later, she acted charming, but tensions escalated. My dad told her to sit down, but she refused, and they started arguing. He played some pranks on her, like threatening to reveal her true personality to her fiancé, which eventually led to her sitting down. I was allowed to return to the room, but my sister continued manipulating the situation. She made threats about cutting contact and never allowing our parents to see their potential grandchildren. She tried to convince my mom to stick with the $100,000 wedding plan, but my parents refused. My dad yelled, "Mom isn't her punching bag, and PPD isn't an excuse," which ended the argument. He told her to seek counseling if she was truly upset. After that, I was called back down, and we discussed everything, starting with the keto diet book. My dad defended me when my sister accused me of being obese and lazy. When she began to cry, my mom asked Dad to go easier on her, and he softened up a bit. After talking things through, I started to feel more like part of the family again, and less like a target. Eventually, my sister left in an Uber, claiming she feared for her life. We've decided to hold off on further discussions about how to move forward as a family until Christmas, when our brothers are back in town. At that point, we'll decide whether to cut her off or go to therapy together. My sisters and parents are still trying to figure out the budget issue, with my parents making it clear that everyone will need to pitch in if the wedding is going to happen. All the in-laws agreed that $100,000 is a ridiculous amount to spend on a wedding. From what I've heard, her sister will receive $15,000 for the wedding, essentially $5,000 because of the $10,000 gown her in-laws are generously contributing. They are giving $10,000 for the wedding and $5,000 for the honeymoon. The remaining $10,000 is being set aside for something material since it has already been ordered. Regarding my education, My father and I will be visiting the bank tomorrow to settle the cancellation fee for the loan I had to take out. Thankfully, the cancellation fee is minimal because the loan only takes effect once I start school. Since my dad realizes I shouldn't have had to take out the loan in the first place, he is covering the costs. My parents decided that my first year of college and housing expenses would not be deducted from my budget of $17,000 or $25,000. Instead, they will pay the entire amount they set aside for me, which will be deposited into a TFSA for future use. Even though my sister despises me and my relationship with my mother is strained, she blames me for everything and claims I ruined her relationship with her fiancé and in-laws. She has banned me from the wedding and from her life. Honestly, I don't care. I don't see it as losing a sister, but rather as losing a bully. I promised my mom and dad that I would never treat my younger sister poorly. I intend to be the role model she deserves and protect her, just like my brothers and father did for me. I think I've covered everything, but if anyone has questions, feel free to ask. I'm truly grateful for this subreddit, for teaching me what a real family is about, and for highlighting the importance of boundaries and communication. Wishing you all an amazing life, you wonderful people. Update in comments. There's something important I want to address that seems to have been overlooked. Your sister trying to hurt you is a big deal. I hope you take the time in therapy to talk about this because it's traumatic. It's not okay that your parents used it as a joke. They should have ensured your sister received therapy right away. You deserve answers to these questions, and your sister owes you an apology. You might also want to inform her fiancé about the money issue. He deserves to know what he's getting into. To clarify, my mom and dad didn't turn it into a funny story at first. It was mostly my sister saying it was a joke when we got older. They never left me alone with her. Either they were in the room, or my older brother was with me. It was only when I was around 10 or 11, and my sister and I started to bond, that the joke came about. I forgave her, and honestly thought it was a joke, but now I realize it wasn't. She has held a grudge against me since day one. As for therapy, I neglected to mention that she did receive help from ages 7 to 10. Initially, it was just a doctor who saw her once a month, from around 4.5 to 6.5. She learned to say exactly what they wanted to hear, which led to her visits being discontinued. My dad was okay with this, but my mom sought a second opinion and found the best child psychologist in Alberta for her. They worked with her for nearly 4 years, claiming they taught her a lot and helped her with her trauma. However, I feel like she just became adept at saying what they wanted to hear. Regarding her fiancé, he knows about the situation. I sent him a long text and voice message, and we talked on the phone for 2 hours. In the end, he dismissed it with a shrug. Looking back, I believe he was aware of everything. Do your parents recognize that by allowing your sister to act out for so long, they may have failed her? It seems to me that they're placing all their past mistakes onto her because of their involvement in raising the boys while neglecting her. For instance, your sister once tried to suffocate you with a pillow, which they seem to justify due to her feelings of neglect. I believe this plays a role in why she behaves the way she does. When she was a toddler, she exhibited concerning behaviors like biting and pushing others, and even intentionally hurting her brothers or kids at daycare. However, I think the real turning point was when she had to take on motherly duties in your household. With your mom out of the picture for a while, your sister and your aunt stepped in to help care for you and the family, but she was never able to truly take on a mother's role. Things did improve a bit when you were around 12, and she even tried talking to you about her feelings of resentment. But when your mom became pregnant again, your sister's anger towards you resurfaced. I know your sister started therapy around age 7 to 10 because of her bitterness towards your mom, and she would often act out, sometimes harming the dog or damaging things around the house. It seems like both your parents played a role in your sister's behavior, even though they might have thought they were doing their best. They didn't completely fail her or you, but they missed some major warning signs. Your father may not have fully neglected your sister, but she clearly felt overlooked, especially since the boys were involved in sports and traveled often. She became possessive of her father and even had special father-daughter dates that were just for them. But even when your parents noticed her troubling behavior, it seems like the underlying issues were never fully addressed. Your sister's behavior, from manipulating situations to getting what she wanted, reflects deeper problems. She's even managed to steal her fiancé from another girl just because she wanted him. Some people with borderline personality disorder, BPD, are known to be master manipulators and can even fool therapists by masking their actions or lying about how they feel. If your sister refuses therapy unless it's to prove she's right, that's a sign of how deep these issues run. Going no contact might be the best option for you, since it could help bring peace to your life without the constant drama. Therapy only works when someone is willing to be honest and seek change, which doesn't seem to apply to her right now. You should consider therapy for yourself to help navigate this situation. It could offer you the tools to heal and cope with these challenges. Many families try to maintain a sense of normalcy when dealing with someone with untreated BPD, but it's anything but normal. Once you recognize this, you'll be able to start your own healing process. Yeah, Mom has a therapy session this Monday to work through the guilt-tripping and financial issues. She and Dad are undergoing couples therapy as well. I've started my own therapy for a variety of reasons. My brothers are stationed hundreds of kilometers away, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on with them. At the time of the argument, my younger sister wasn't present, since we arranged a playdate for her and her daycare friend. 3 months later, here's an update. It's been a while, but I recently recovered the login to my account. Family therapy has been going great. Both of my brothers were granted leave to return to Canada temporarily. They were stationed abroad, and this has helped move the healing process forward. After this, they'll likely return overseas. My mom and I have grown closer, and the family is finally getting back on track. I feel like I've regained my best friend. To be honest, I don't really know what's going on with my sister. A friend of mine follows her on social media, and it seems like she's doing fine. The wedding, originally scheduled for December 17th, was moved up to November 26th. It looks like she and her fiancé bought a house, and rumor has it she's expecting. We're all holding strong, even though she's cut us off, and her fiancé's family has been gossiping about us. On a brighter note, Ottawa is my new home. In addition to my 3 virtual therapy sessions a month, I also get an in-person session whenever I return home. My older brother is getting married, which means I'll be gaining an amazing new sibling, despite the tension with my sister. My brother's fiancée is lovely. She texts me every few days, orders me an Uber when I'm not feeling well, and is generally very caring. She even asked if I'd be comfortable with her becoming my guardian if anything ever happened to her, which I agreed to. She's an only child, and her mother passed away, so by this time next year, I'll officially have a new sister. Oh, and I have a boyfriend. There's not much to say about him yet, but he's in the army too. Seems like I can't avoid that. He's incredibly supportive and devoted. I'm looking forward to celebrating our 1-month anniversary in January. Thank you so much, Reddit. I hope each and every one of you has a prosperous, healthy, and fulfilling life. You're all wonderful, kind, and soulful people, and I cherish every one of you. As for the wedding update that so many were curious about, the ceremony itself didn't have much drama since neither my family nor the groom's family was allowed to attend. However, I heard from relatives and friends that things got interesting at the reception. Despite it being a child-free event, the groom's mother showed up in an off-white dress, and some guests brought children. But the real drama unfolded when the groom's mother brought one of his ex-girlfriends, hoping to break up the wedding. It didn't work, thankfully, and I feel bad for my sister because of it. The groom stood up to his mom and told her to leave, which I commend him for. In the end, they made it to the altar, and they're heading off for their honeymoon either today or tomorrow. One thing is for sure, my sister is definitely pregnant. During the wedding speeches, the groom revealed a slideshow with an ultrasound image and the baby's last name. The baby is due in June 2023. Sorry for the lack of updates earlier. Story 2. My husband may have fathered his best friend's children, and one of them seems to be drawn to our daughter. Children Tom, 17, Kay, 14, and twins Adam and Jenna are Amy's kids. As far as I know, Amy was single at 9. She was dating occasionally but not seriously. Since Luke and I have a larger family, Amy would sometimes get pregnant. We didn't know who the fathers were, but it happened a few times. I suspected Amy might have been involved with different people without communicating about her one-night stands. Luke agreed that this was likely the case. Despite my inquiries, Amy never acknowledged who the fathers were and didn't seem overly concerned about being a single parent. I didn't press her since she had our support. Although Amy never asked for help, Luke was determined not to let his best friend struggle financially while raising her children. We are fortunate to be in a good financial position. I have a well-paying job, and Luke's wealthy parents already loved and supported Amy. My in-laws defy stereotypes. They are incredibly kind and gentle, allowing us to help Amy find a place to stay with her kids. While some might label her a leech, none of us saw it that way. She needed help, and we were able to provide it. I anticipate that people will criticize her for her irresponsibility and question why she didn't use more reliable birth control. Honestly, that's a complicated story that I don't fully understand. It was very important to Amy not to be on birth control, and she accepted whatever consequences came with that choice. It wasn't motivated by religion, but it held significant meaning for her. She explained her reasons to me several times, yet I still don't grasp why she felt so strongly. Given that Amy has been Luke's best friend since childhood, it's not unusual for them to hang out together when I'm not around. That's fine. I occasionally spend one-on-one time with Amy too, although Luke does it more often since she was his friend first. This included him visiting her, and sometimes staying overnight. Perhaps I was naive to trust him and believe nothing was happening, but for years they acted like close friends or siblings, and I never sensed any romantic vibes between them. Our children were raised together, not in the same house, since our home is spacious but not big enough for 8 kids. We ensured that Amy's children met ours from a young age, and they've formed strong friendships over the years, which is especially good if they share blood. Now to the main point. I have begun to suspect that Luke is the father of at least one, if not all, of Amy's children. Honestly, I suspect they all might be his. I never would have thought my husband capable of infidelity, and he has given me no indication that he is unfaithful. However, he spends a lot of time with Amy, and I have to admit I can't recall ever seeing her with a serious boyfriend over the years. She would chat with men at bars and parties, and I tried to help her connect, but nothing significant ever seemed to develop. When she got pregnant for the first time, I was curious, and after the subsequent pregnancies, I started to wonder if she had a secret partner that she was keeping from us. After our youngest, Carter, was born, Luke and I agreed it was time for him to have a vasectomy. Amy had her twins just a couple of years before that. After the procedure, Luke and I continued to be intimate without worrying about pregnancy, while Amy never got pregnant again after the twins. Is it merely a coincidence that Luke had a vasectomy and then we both stopped having children? I can't say for sure. Luke still visited Amy, not just to see her, but to check on her kids as well. In hindsight, I should have paid more attention. Luke has always acted like a father to them, especially as they've grown older, filling the void left by their biological father. He is not neglectful toward me or our children. He is doing double duty, which could be seen as noble. However, it all adds up with various little details that raise suspicions. I won't delve into specifics regarding hair color, eye color, or other distinguishing traits to maintain privacy, but suffice it to say that Amy's children certainly. It seems like there are some striking similarities between Amy's children and Luke, especially considering they share an unusual allergy and that the twins physically resemble him, Adam in particular. As Tom has gotten older, his appearance and personality have become even more reminiscent of Luke. While their racial background doesn't matter, it's worth noting that Luke and Amy are of different races, and Amy's children appear biracial, which makes it easy to believe that Luke could be their father. Of course, this doesn't automatically mean Luke is their father. but it certainly feels like a possibility. I've never confronted Amy or Luke about these suspicions, because regardless of whether they're true, I know they would deny it and be hurt by the accusations. The potential fallout, especially if our children or Amy's children found out, has kept me quiet. Meanwhile, Luke continues to spend time with Amy and her kids, just as her children interact with mine. I've tried subtly mentioning to Luke that I feel like I'm being overlooked or that he's giving more attention to Amy, but he either missed my hints or pretended not to notice. I don't want to press the issue, because I can't say for sure he's favoring her, and he's never truly ignored me for her. Still, I can't shake the feeling that Luke and Amy have been involved intimately, perhaps even multiple times. As far as I know, Amy never really envisioned herself as a mother. While she embraced motherhood once her children were born, it wasn't something she had ever set her heart on. So, I doubt that her having children was part of any plan to be with Luke. It seems more like an unintended consequence if there was any infidelity. I've been trying to push these fears aside for years, but they resurfaced after I found out about Kale's allergy. This suspicion, which I initially dismissed, grew stronger after the twins were born. I hoped it would fade when Amy stopped having kids, but the news that Luke had a vasectomy after the twins were born only made me more anxious. Despite all this, I don't want to be the one to tear our family apart, especially since I could be wrong. Yet, I'm growing increasingly uneasy as time goes on. Recently, my daughter Sophie's social life has expanded, and it took a surprising turn when she was asked out by Tom, Amy's son. Sophie, who has blossomed into a confident and beautiful young woman over the past few years, was charmed by Tom's interest, though she declined his offer because she knew she had to ask for my permission first. When she came to me, she expected me to agree, but I firmly told her no. We had a disagreement, not because she was particularly keen on dating Tom, but because she couldn't understand why I had said no. I couldn't fully explain my reasoning to her, though I tried, telling her that it wasn't just about the age difference. Secretly, I was curious to see how Amy and Luke would react. If they had supported Sophie and encouraged me to let her date Tom, I might have felt relieved and interpreted it as proof that my suspicions were unfounded. But they didn't. They both agreed with me, though not as strongly. Luke expressed concerns similar to mine, though he also worried that forbidding the relationship might make Sophie want it more, a valid point. Amy seemed indifferent, not too invested in the idea of Tom dating Sophie. Despite the decision to keep Sophie and Tom apart, the two of them have continued to spend more time together. It's becoming increasingly clear that Tom has strong feelings for Sophie and wants to pursue a relationship, likely a physical one. While I've been keeping a close watch and trying to prevent anything from developing, I feel a bit powerless. Sophie hasn't outright defied me, and enforcing a complete separation between her and Tom seems both impractical and likely to backfire. No more sneaking around, since they're still just hanging out as friends, but I'm terrified they've already crossed a line. I'm scared they might be seeing each other in secret and doing who knows what when no one is around. I've noticed that Tom is becoming a bit handsy with Sophie, and she doesn't seem to mind at all. I'm at a loss here. I can't seem to change Sophie's perception of Tom or their emotional connection. I even thought about trying to convince her that he's like a brother to her. While my kids may see Amy's kids as best friends, I've always viewed Amy and her kids as family. The problem is that Tom and Sophie will never be more than friends. If my husband has indeed been having an affair over the years, and if I'm right in thinking he's the father of Amy's children, this discussion becomes even more complicated. Still, I feel powerless to stop it. Luke has been persistent, and despite having talked to Tom and Amy, he won't stop pushing Sophie toward Tom. Sophie probably appreciates all the attention from Tom, which makes things worse. Tom even asked me why I was so against him dating Sophie, knowing full well he'd be a great partner for her. All I could do was tell him she's too young for him, but I know that's only a temporary solution. In a few years, they'll still be drawn to each other, and once they're adults, there's nothing I can do to stop them. I agree with Amy and Luke that Tom shouldn't date Sophie, but that's about all we've managed to do. We all feel helpless, trying to stop teenage love. Sometimes it seems like they've given up, hoping that Tom and Sophie's feelings will eventually fade. They both go to high school, so it's unlikely that they'll stay in love forever. But I worry that Sophie might give in and let Tom be intimate with her before they're ready, with no way to take it back afterward. I'm on the verge of opening the door and screaming at Luke that none of this would have happened if he hadn't cheated on me all these years, secretly raising a second family with his surrogate sister. Now, Luke's son wants to be with our daughter, his own sister, because he believes she's just his childhood friend. It's all because of Luke and Amy's decisions. But if I say anything, it'll blow everything apart. And if by some chance I'm wrong, I'll feel like a monster for accusing my best friend and husband of something so awful. If I'm right, though, everything we've built as a family over the years will be destroyed, and everyone will be hurt. Even if I don't divorce Luke, I'm afraid that Sophie will end up becoming Tom's girlfriend, and the situation will spiral. Or worse, what if it's already happening right under my nose? As they get older, I hope their relationship ends. But what if it doesn't? What if they end up together for the long term? What if they get married and try to have kids, only to find out they're siblings? If I tell Sophie the truth about Amy's kids, it will shatter so many lives. My children's perception of their father and Aunt Amy would be ruined. Owen idolizes Luke, and the thought of how this would affect him is heartbreaking. Amy's kids are innocent too. They didn't ask for any of this. I don't want to hurt them. They can't control where they came from. Honestly, I'm frustrated with Tom right now. Last week, I wanted to scream when I saw him touch Sophie inappropriately. But even he doesn't deserve to live with the guilt of knowing that the girl he dreams about is actually his half-sister. Everything feels so broken, and I'm lost. For so long, I've ignored and tolerated my husband and his best friend making a fool of me. I thought I could handle it, but this situation with Tom and Sophie is tearing me apart. First of all, an update. Wow, I didn't expect my post to gain so much attention. I was indeed quite worried that a family member or acquaintance might discover it, especially after finding out that the post had been shared on Facebook. Fortunately, to the best of my knowledge, no one in my family has seen it. I genuinely appreciate everyone who left me well wishes in the comments. I understand why some were irritated by my hesitation, but I was working in a highly unpredictable environment with significant risks. No matter what decision I made, I felt like something could, and probably would, go wrong. For the past 5 years, I've been developing several plans based on different approaches I could take if I ever decided to take action. I have an update for all of you who have been asking for one. In my earlier statement, I mentioned that I had made up my mind to take a covert DNA test, but I ultimately decided against it. Now, I regret that choice, as the opportunity to do so has almost passed. I felt it would be inappropriate to secretly harm someone else's child, which raised ethical concerns, as many commenters pointed out. I consulted with my lawyer, who advised me against pursuing it, warning that it could damage my reputation regardless of the outcome. I still need to know, though, and I wish I had gone through with it and kept it a secret. I also wanted to tell Sophie privately, but the more I thought about it, the more excessive it seemed, especially since I hadn't even spoken to her father before planting such ideas in her head. I found myself going up against Luke and Amy, as mentioned by several commenters. Eventually, I informed them both that we needed to have a serious discussion. I thought each would convey what had happened in their own words, making it counterproductive to approach just one of them. I wanted to express my thoughts to both before preparing my own. After the kids had gone to school, I expressed my love for them both and laid out all my suspicions. A number of hints had pointed out the similarities between Luke and Amy's kids. I didn't provide an exhaustive list in my initial piece, but for instance, Luke used to be a sleepwalker, just like Adam, Tom, and Sophie. I repeatedly emphasized my love for them and my refusal to accept the situation, although it had crossed my mind before. Now that Tom and Sophie were crushing on each other, I felt it was time to ask the tough questions. I inquired whether Luke had ever cheated on his wife, and if there was even a remote chance that any of Amy's kids were his. I had to fight back tears as I waited for their response, which was exactly what I had anticipated. They had rehearsed their replies so much that they were flawless. I wasn't sure if their reactions were genuine feelings or a result of strong gaslighting. While Luke seemed merely devastated, Amy appeared much more upset, feeling insulted by my accusation. I wasn't sure if they were just acting. Their rational responses left me confused. I found myself questioning why it had never bothered me before that they had a close relationship. Why was I suddenly feeling this way now? Were Amy's children really so much like Luke, or were the similarities merely universal traits? Since Amy and her children didn't have a father, our family had always embraced them as part of our own, and I had praised Luke for stepping up as a father figure. Why was I framing this as bad news now? What exactly did I want them to do? How could I have viewed them in that way? I questioned my long silence on the matter. Amy was less understanding than Luke. At least he seemed to grasp how I felt. My words only made Amy feel more betrayed. I apologized multiple times, even though I wasn't sure if I had done anything wrong. Luke expressed regret for anything he might have done that suggested infidelity after my accusations. I then asked Amy more directly who had fathered her children, if not Luke. She sneered and said it was none of my business, making it clear she wasn't in the mood for vulnerability or personal discussions. I regret to admit that I became enraged and suggested that maybe she. I felt like Amy owed us an explanation, given how much we had already done for her and her kids. In response, she yelled back that I had done nothing for her, claiming that Luke and his parents had supported her all these years. Not me. I immediately regretted saying what I did, but she went on a rant about how I had always acted superior toward her. I don't believe that's true, though maybe I unintentionally gave off that vibe. Luke did his best to calm her down, but the tension in the room was palpable. I'm at a breaking point. There's one way to be sure, not about Luke's fidelity, but about the paternity of Amy's children. So, I asked Luke for a DNA test, not because I don't trust him, but for my peace of mind and the sake of our family. I told him I knew he disliked the idea, but I really needed it. I could see the pain in his eyes, and while part of me wonders if it was an act, he genuinely seemed hurt. Still, he reluctantly agreed to the test. However, Amy refused outright, and that's where we hit a roadblock. Amy was furious at the suggestion and told me, in no uncertain terms, that I would not be getting DNA samples from her children. I was terrified, but Amy simply shut me down every time I tried to bring it up in different ways. Luke tried to convince her, but she wouldn't budge, and he essentially shrugged it off, saying he couldn't force her to do the test. I looked into it legally, but my lawyer confirmed that without Luke making a direct claim of paternity, we were stuck. Luke could theoretically petition the court for a paternity test, but that would require him to admit to sleeping with Amy, which he insists never happened. Whether or not he's telling the truth is one thing, but he refuses to go on record saying he fathered her children. Luke is convinced that Amy's kids aren't his and doesn't want to fight for custody, so no judge is going to compel Amy to provide DNA samples. Tom, being old enough, would also need to consent, and both he and Amy are likely to refuse. Even if Luke were to target one of Amy's younger children, like the twins, he doesn't want to go through the process of taking his best friend to court for something he believes isn't true. Luke is begging me to drop the issue, warning that pursuing this will fracture everything. And according to my lawyer, it's not realistic anyway. Luke would need to admit to an affair, which he won't do. Even though I need proof to feel confident, the legal path isn't going to provide it. Meanwhile, there's the issue with Tom and Sophie. Sophie argued with me when I told her she couldn't date Tom, and Luke seems to still be on the same page as Amy, agreeing that the kids shouldn't be together. Luke even plans to talk to Tom and remind him that a relationship with Sophie would be illegal when he turns 18. I know Tom wouldn't do anything against Sophie's wishes, and I don't plan to file charges against him, but the situation is unsettling. When I asked Luke if he would secretly test Tom's DNA for paternity, he said it was unethical, just like I suspected. He also pointed out that doing so would destroy our friendship with Amy if she found out. Luke believes there's still a chance for Amy and me to reconcile, and I understand why he hopes for that, but I can't help being curious about the test results. Still, I know Amy would lose it if I went behind her back. While part of me wouldn't blame her, I'm left wondering what the truth really is. Luke spent the night with Amy. I know that probably makes everyone cringe, and trust me, I wasn't happy about it either. It led to quite the conversation, but he insisted he had to handle some damage control, so they stayed up all night, acting like nothing happened. I kept texting him for updates and didn't sleep a wink. Amy needs some time, but based on what I've seen, she'll eventually cool off. Luke and I had a deep conversation when he came back the next morning, and we decided to take our kids, not Amy's, on a visit to their grandparents for a few days. It was a bit of an impromptu trip, but we'd visited before, and they were happy to have us. I mainly wanted to get our family away from Amy's side for a bit. Seeing my in-laws is always nice. I'll call them Jim, 75M, and Kath, 67F. In my experience, they're nothing like the stereotypical monster in-laws you hear about. I felt so safe with them that I opened up about my anxieties. They noticed that Luke and I had been distant, so I told them about my fear that Luke and Amy were having an affair and that he might be the father of Amy's children. That's when things got interesting. I shared my feelings, and all Kath did was give Jim a stern look and let out a big dramatic sigh. Apparently, Kath has had similar doubts for years. She's always suspected that Luke and Amy were closer than they let on and might have crossed a line at some point. Jim, however, has always refused to even entertain the idea. He's convinced that Kath is imagining things, insisting that since Luke and Amy are like siblings, they would never behave that way. Kath thinks Jim is being naive and pointed out that even though they raised Amy like a daughter, that didn't mean Luke saw her as a sister, or vice versa. The two of them started going in circles, and it was clear they'd had this argument before. Kath got a bit worked up and mentioned that surrogate siblings are not the same as biological ones. Since Luke and Amy aren't actually related, there's nothing to stop them from having a physical relationship if they were inclined. Jim just sighed and walked away from the conversation at that point. It turns out Kath has quietly wondered whether Luke could be the father of Amy's children, which is part of why she's always treated Amy's kids like her own grandchildren. Honestly, that never bothered me. Kath not sharing her suspicions with me doesn't upset me either. She didn't have any proof, and she hasn't seen as much of Luke and Amy's interactions in our adult lives as I have. As for the kids, they're doing fine. I'm not sure what Amy told her children, but the official story seems to be that she and I had a falling out and need some time apart. Luke and I explained it similarly to our kids. When I tried to dig deeper, Luke shielded me from the details, saying it wasn't the kids' concern. I don't know if Amy stuck to her version, but our kids and hers are on social media and text each other, so they've likely been in contact. If Amy had shared anything significant, my kids would have heard about it, and vice versa. Sophie and Tom are close, as everyone knows. I tried to talk to Sophie more about the situation, but it wasn't the right time. She brushed off my concerns and assumed my hesitation was still about my argument with Amy. She insists that she and Tom aren't dating, though I'm not sure how much of that is true. Regardless, she made it clear that she plans to stay friends with him. Sophie's generally a good kid, but she's definitely drawing her boundaries here. To be honest, I can't blame her. They've been friends for so long, and I haven't done a great job justifying why I'm so adamant about keeping them apart. I support Luke's decision to forbid them from dating, but he doesn't back me up on keeping them from spending time together. I wish I had more current information, and I'll update you if anything important happens over the next few days. For my own mental well-being, I'm mostly just frustrated with myself for not running a paternity test earlier. It feels like I've been cut off from the one way to get definitive proof. Update 2. After posting my first update, I spent a lot of time reflecting on my kids. I didn't expect to have another update so soon, but I ultimately concluded that I needed to inform Sophie about the issue as soon as possible, regardless of the consequences for Luke. She had to understand what she might be getting into, even if it meant all the kids would find out. After we returned home last night, I made sure Sophie didn't go to school. This morning, I sent everyone off and saved Sophie for last, driving straight past her school and telling her we needed to talk. It's often unsettling for a teenager to hear from their parents, but I made it clear right away that she wasn't in any trouble. However, she needed to know the truth behind my arguments with Amy and why dating Tom wasn't an option for her. I gently mentioned that over the years, I had started to suspect that Luke and Amy had been intimate, given Luke's closeness to Amy and Tom's resemblance to him. If that turned out to be true, it would be a serious issue, and there was a possibility that Luke could be Tom's real father. Sophie remained silent throughout this, and when I finally stopped talking to give her space to respond, she hesitated for a long time before suggesting that we should involve Tom in the conversation. I didn't object, so she texted him to set up a meeting. Even though they were both skipping school today, Sophie, who usually gets straight A's, which I chose to ignore, she asked me to share what I told her when Tom arrived. I apologized to both of them for not coming forward sooner, and for any indication I might have given that Tom wasn't worthy of my daughter. When Tom and Sophie exchanged a knowing look and turned to Reddit, they truly amazed me. Sophie took the lead with Tom's support, revealing that they had known about Luke for a long time, or at least had serious suspicions. It seemed Tom had overheard conversations that raised doubts and preferred to forget the sounds of sex coming from Amy's room. All signs pointed to Luke being Amy's lover, and Tom had been wondering for a long time. He finally shared his concerns with Sophie back in January, and she agreed with him. She had also noticed an unusual bond between her father and Amy. They both concluded that Luke was probably having an affair, and that he could very well be Kale's father due to her allergy. If Kale was Luke's daughter, then Luke could also be the father of Tom's other siblings, leading them to wonder if Tom might be Luke's own child. They ended up where I had, questioning everything, because of the math. As it turns out, Sophie and Tom aren't romantically involved. They simply came up with a plan to avoid blowing up our family and social circle until they had more concrete evidence, which Tom has been trying to gather. Sophie was hesitant to reveal the truth, even though she knew it would break me. In fact, we both ended up crying, and I told her I loved her, and that none of this was her fault. In summary, Sophie and Tom aren't genuinely interested in being a couple. They are aware they could be half-siblings. They devised this plan to provoke me and prompt Luke and Amy to take action instead of letting me continue to be the fool. Additionally, I believe Tom and Sophie were punishing their parents for their affair. Teens can be vengeful, so they concocted this story about wanting to date. Given every inappropriate touch and flirtation I've witnessed, it seemed everything was planned either for Luke, Amy, or both of them. Sophie and Tom anticipated that I would confront Tom about why I couldn't date Sophie, leading him to question whether I knew. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. Tom and Sophie have always been close friends who confide in each other. Maybe I should be more worried, but honestly, I'm just relieved they're not dating. They might be lying to create confusion, but it seems they already suspected they were related. When I told them, they didn't even blink, and we shared a small chuckle. I jokingly asked Tom if he thought Sophie was gorgeous, and he mentioned being a bit offended that I had been so against him dating my daughter. He waved it off, saying, "Indeed she is. I'm not asking my English teacher out, but she's also single." Now, the question is what to do next. We need to resolve that. I'll add that telling Sophie has been such a relief. It feels like an elephant has lifted its foot off my chest. It means a lot to have her and Tom by my side, even though I already suspected that Luke was sleeping with Amy. With recent concrete proof, the only question left is what to do next. Tom has already volunteered to submit his DNA so I can compare it with Luke's, and both he and Sophie have advised me not to tell Luke or Amy when I do this. I agree with their suggestion. They're both fully on my side, which means more to me than I can ever express. Tom has even been trying to set up a camera in Amy's room to catch her and Luke in the act. Sophie flat out told me that I needed to divorce her dad, and hearing that from my own daughter made everything clearer than ever. She's right. To address a few points from the comments, I don't have any DNA test results back yet, That can take weeks. However, now that I know Sophie is in no danger of dating a relative, the pressure has eased. I'll explain this more in a moment, but whether or not Luke fathered Amy's children no longer matters as much. I highly doubt my father-in-law is having an affair with Amy. At worst, he might know or suspect the truth about Amy and Luke, but it's also possible he's simply in denial. For privacy reasons, I've been cautious with details, but to put it simply, both Jim and Amy are white, while Luke is not. If Jim had fathered Amy's babies, they would look different than they do. Nevertheless, I do have an update. While a lot of comments have labeled me as spineless, naive, or called me a sister wife, as an ex-Mormon, that hits a nerve, and some have even suggested my story is fake. Fair enough, this is the internet. I assure you, Luke is not the first man to juggle two families. On the other hand, several comments have been kind and supportive, and I truly appreciate that. Apologies if I haven't responded to your comments or DMs. I've received hundreds, and I've likely missed some. Now, on to the latest. Our little team has apparently recruited my mother-in-law to help. Sophie and Tom were going to talk to her about assisting with the DNA test. And per my lawyer's advice, I'm staying officially out of it. Sophie said she wouldn't proceed without my approval, but I told her not to. My mother-in-law hasn't reached out to me about it yet either, but I'll touch on that later. In short, I wasn't aware of any loophole related to DNA testing, but I've learned a lot recently. Another positive update is that, in an attempt to gain the upper hand over Luke, I started reviewing my divorce paperwork. I also noticed that the house is in my name, not Luke's. I bought it, and while we intended to add Luke to the title, it never happened, and the idea was eventually forgotten. My attorney, Paige, pointed this out, and it felt like finding a winning lottery ticket on the ground. Without Paige, I don't know where I'd be. I reached out to her, a close friend from college, and she's been a tremendous support, not just as a lawyer, but also as a friend during this tough time. Luke and I do have a family lawyer who's helped us through difficult times in the past, but Paige specializes in divorce and family law. I should invite her over for coffee sometime. Luke remembers her from college, but he has no idea she's a divorce attorney. It's a bit ironic. He's not the only one who can pretend to be friends while secretly keeping someone from their spouse's knowledge. Now, for the big update. The last time I checked, Luke's phone was 3 months ago, around the time Sophie and Tom began pretending to date. I didn't find anything back then, even though I know how to check for recently deleted photos. Recently, though, I took his phone again while he was asleep, brought it downstairs, and went through it. This time, I discovered deleted messages between him and Amy. In their recent exchange, Amy called me a problem, and Luke tried to calm her down without defending me. They both mentioned they had expected this, probably referring to me confronting them about the affair, but nothing concrete was acknowledged. I kept scrolling back to a few days before our fight, and Amy's messages started getting more flirty. Then, 5 days before I confronted them, I found what I was looking for. Amy had sent Luke a topless selfie with no shirt or bra, completely nude. I broke down in tears. Even though I knew it was real, actually seeing it hit me like a punch to the gut. Amy has always been more physically endowed than me, which made it worse. I closed the messaging app, but something urged me to check Luke's recently deleted photos. There it was, the same selfie along with others. Amy flaunting her body, nude, topless. Some pictures showed them together, snuggled up like a couple. She was naked in some, and others showed both of them. There were even videos. Amy sent Luke a video message where she was topless, speaking in a tone that made me feel ill, telling him she was sending a little something to help him through his day. In multiple videos, she called him Boo, and hearing that made me want to vomit. I tried to stop looking after that, but for about 5 minutes, I couldn't. Something drove me to keep searching, so I checked Luke's laptop. I knew enough of his passcodes to access his iCloud, and there it was, more of the same. There were long letters between them, though I couldn't bring myself to read more than the first few lines of one. I saw Luke even mentioned our kids. There were countless naked and topless selfies of Amy, more pictures of the two of them together, and videos of Amy, doing things I can't even describe. There were sex tapes of them too. Luke had been hiding this massive treasure trove right under my nose for years. I scrolled through more pictures, videos. It just kept going. Some weren't even sexual. There were photos of Amy's kids too. One video showed Kaylee and the twins playing together when they were younger, with Luke and Amy's voices in the background. There were also old photos of Luke and Amy from when they were kids, possibly even teenagers. My anger boiled over. All these years, I had convinced myself I was wrong, that it couldn't possibly be true. Well, now I had all the evidence I could ever want, and it hurt worse than I imagined. I didn't have to look at everything I did, but once I started, it felt impossible to stop. The pain was overwhelming, and in that moment, I knew I had to act. I called my lawyer, a wonderful woman. It was the middle of the night, and I had to call twice before she picked up. But she did, even though I woke her. When I told her it was an emergency, she agreed to come over. I asked her to start the divorce paperwork immediately, and she told me she had it ready since I first contacted her. While I waited for her, I went on Luke's laptop and made sure he wouldn't be able to remotely erase or disconnect anything from his cloud storage by changing the passwords. When my lawyer, Paige, arrived, I met her outside. I broke down in the car, crying for what felt like 30 minutes. After I pulled myself together, I asked her to make copies of everything on Luke's devices, but I couldn't bear to do it myself. She warned me this might be considered theft, but I didn't care. I handed over Luke's laptop and phone and told her to get whatever she could from them. Once that was done, I went back inside and quietly packed up all of Luke's things while everyone else slept. He stirred a couple of times but didn't wake up fully. I packed everything he owned into trash bags and loaded them into the car. When everything was ready, I woke Luke up. Still half asleep, he noticed his stuff was missing and followed me outside as I asked him to come with me. I didn't answer any of his questions. Once we reached the car, I handed him the divorce papers. That's when it hit him. He tried to convince me to change my mind, saying he loved me, insisting nothing had ever happened with Amy. 2 weeks ago, his words might have worked. I might have caved under his manipulation. But not now. I could see through every lie. I kept quiet about what I'd found, only telling him we were done. He argued, saying our kids were his too, that I had no right to decide they would stay with me. He refused to leave. I reminded him icily that the house is in my name and told him our children would never live with Amy. After a long argument, he finally gave in, deciding to be the bigger person and leave. I didn't care where he went. Before he left, he asked about his laptop and phone, but I brushed it off, saying they were packed away. I spent the rest of the night in bed, crying. At some point, I realized I needed to pull myself together because I would have to explain everything to the kids in the morning. I woke Sophie first and told her I had kicked her father out after finding proof of an affair on his devices. She didn't ask what kind of proof, and I didn't offer any more details. Gently waking the others, I informed them that their father had left to stay somewhere else for the time being. I wasn't sure where, but I let them know that things wouldn't be the same moving forward. It was Louise who asked about our impending divorce, and I couldn't bring myself to lie to her. Yes, I told her, and I felt like crying when they asked when they could see their father again. Sophie was a great help, telling her siblings to focus on being kind to me for now, and not to worry about Dad just yet. I knew that shielding them from the truth would be unfair to their father, since Sophie was already aware that the affair had been confirmed. I only told her after Paige warned me against doing so. When I went to watch the kids get ready for school, Sophie directly asked if Luke's decision to be with Amy had anything to do with their situation. I guess that was an answer in itself, but I couldn't respond. After dropping the kids off at school, I called to have the locks replaced. I knew Luke would soon come for his gadgets, but thankfully, Paige brought them back before he arrived. The visit ended far too quickly. She assured me everything was settled and that she had all the documentation we would need for court. As expected, Luke showed up an hour later, demanding to know where his phone and laptop were. I told him he had forgotten them and that I'd put them back in our bedroom as if they had never been moved. I said I must have been mistaken, but he claimed I had said they were in one of the bags. I shrugged it off and he tried to reason with me again after he took the devices, but I simply pointed him toward the door. I suspected he was trying to delay his departure to spend more time with the kids, who would soon be arriving home from school. I wasn't having it, so I yelled again to send him on his way. I'm still in excruciating pain and despair over everything I witnessed. He didn't mention it, but I'm unsure whether he knows that someone went through his gadgets and copied evidence, or if he thinks I saw anything. Once he left, I started crying again. That evening, I spoke with my mother-in-law. To my surprise, Luke visited his parents instead of staying with Amy. Perhaps he realizes how unsettling that would be for the kids and is trying to avoid upsetting them. Maybe he wants to provide his version of events because he knows I'm more likely to let the kids see their grandmother than Amy. He told her and Jim that although he had already given me his side, he was having a mental breakdown and wished he could help, but he claimed I was lashing out and becoming violent due to my paranoia. I've never been violent. He tried to reach out to me, but I pushed him away. The funny thing is that he told his parents nothing at all about Amy. He didn't even frame it as me wrongly believing he was having an affair. He spoke to me without mentioning her. Kat noted that his parents seem to believe me when we talk, but Jim is at a loss for what to think these days. Kat mentioned he appeared deeply upset by everything he was hearing about Amy, who remains completely silent. Tom has informed Sophie that although she seems unconcerned, she is clearly under a lot of stress. When her kids ask questions, Sophie consistently asserts that she is pushing them away and that I'm going through an emotional breakdown. Along with blaming Luke, she places all the responsibility on me and says nothing about my accusations of their affair. Since our major fight, I haven't attempted to speak with Amy directly, and she hasn't reached out to me. I made it clear that this isn't a mental health issue, but I haven't really told my kids much other than that I'm having arguments with Luke and Amy. To be honest, I think they all have some idea of what's going on. Tom is still our spy, and Sophie remains my rock as I try to be for her and the others. I knew all of this would stress the kids out, yet it still had to be done, and that's my biggest regret. Even though my life is falling apart, it never truly felt like it was mine.